One of my favorite, and I watch from time to time, I'll go YouTube and watch commencement speeches. And you watch, Oprah here and famous actors and CEOs, legends, whatever. One of my favorite lines, and I'm not sure it was his, maybe he borrowed it, but I've used this over and over in my life. Bon Jovi, John Bon Jovi, gave a commencement speech. Great advice. Outline your life in pencil, not pen. Always be willing to erase. You don't know what you're going to be optioned. John Bon Jovi, outline your life in pencil, not pen. Told my kids this regularly. Russell Wilson needs to heed this advice. According to reporters this morning, Chicago is making a big, big swing at Russell Wilson. We've told you that for a week. And Russell's very keenly interested in Chicago. He needs to grab his pencil and erase Chicago and put Washington in there, and I'll explain. 6 good teams have their quarterback. New England's got Cam. Dallas has Dak. Indy's got Carson Wentz. The Saints have 2 guys, Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston. Pittsburgh signed Big Ben. And the 49ers, say what you want, they've got Jimmy Garoppolo. Those are good teams. 2 other good teams do not. Playoff teams do not have a quarterback. Chicago and Washington. And Russell Wilson said, I like Chicago. Let's think about it. Washington has $38 million of cap space. Chicago's $19 million over the cap. But the brand, most of my childhood, Washington won a lot more football games than Chicago. Washington has a great defensive coach. A better defense than Chicago. Look it up. Pro Football Focus said Washington had a 6th best offensive line. Far superior to Chicago. Much easier division. Play the biggest brand in the world, the Dallas Cowboys, twice a year. With Russell, you'll win both. And a ton of cap space. It's much easier for Russell Wilson to beat big brand Dallas twice a year than it is to beat Aaron Rodgers and big brand Green Bay twice a year. Russell Wilson's career, he's 500 against the Packers in 6 games. You want to know what he is against Dallas, Philadelphia, and the New York Giants? If he went to Washington, 15-3. If you're beating Dallas twice a year, and Jerry twice a year, and Dak twice a year, and you're beating the blue blood New York Giants twice a year, that is a way bigger brand than losing to Green Bay. Outline your life in pencil, not pen. You want to know what Washington is? 1 year ago, they were Tampa before Brady took it. What was Tampa? They'd been 7-9, veteran head coach, super talented defense, promising O-line. Tampa was 7-9. Wait, Washington was 7-9. Veteran head coach. Great defensive talent. Promising O-line. The difference is Washington had more success winning recently than Tampa. They are Tampa. And Tom Brady looked around the league. He could go anywhere, right? Like anywhere. And Tom said, all right, I got the coach. I got the championship defense. I got some offensive pieces I like. And the offensive line needs a right tackle, but it's good. That is Washington. The difference is Washington just made the playoffs. It is time for Russell Wilson to pivot off Chicago and go to Washington. He would own the division. You're not going to own the division if Aaron Rodgers is in it. You're not going to own it. You can win it, but you're not going to own it. Philadelphia's got Jalen Hurts. Who knows? Giants have Daniel Jones. Who knows? Cowboys paying Dak $40 million. Who knows? I mean, they'll win, but who knows? Washington made the playoffs. Taylor Heineke was quarterbacking in the end. Pencil, not pen. Erase. Insert Washington over Chicago. So Drew Brees, and this is not exactly a revelation of like, Watergate status, but Drew Brees retired. It is interesting. Drew Brees is a great example that if you don't look like the prototype, and if your path is different than the prototype, Some people can just never get past that. Drew Brees, number one all-time in passing yards. Now think about that. History of professional football in America. He's number one in passing yards. He's number one in completions. He's the only player ever with multiple 5,000-yard seasons. For our television audience, I'm putting up his records. He basically owns all of them or finishes second. And if Drew Brees was 6'4.5", he'd be Peyton Manning with better stats. He has the most games ever of 3 touchdown passes. He has the most games ever of 4 touchdown passes. He has the most games ever of 5 touchdown passes. It's the Steph Curry syndrome. But he doesn't quite look like we think a star should look, and his path was different. Purdue, Steph Curry, Davidson. Wait a minute. The best player in the league can't be from Davidson. The best quarterback in the league can't be from Purdue, and then he gets hurt, and then he wants to go to Miami, and he ends up with the Saints. And this is a big deal for me. He ends up with the Saints. They were the worst franchise in the league. Just think of what he dealt with the Saints. They were called the Aints. Historically, one playoff win ever. People wore bags on their heads. He gets there. And they become, last 15 years, an elite top 3 to 4 franchise. That's worth something. If Drew Brees was 6'4.5", you turn on sports radio in America, and I listen to people for hours argue Drew Brees at a top 12. Take his stats, make him go to a football power like a Texas, Ohio State, or Michigan, make him number 1 or 2 in everything. Would we argue it? It wouldn't be worth a segment. And people, well, he's not this guy. He's not that guy. Folks, Joe Namath looked like a quarterback should look in the 70s. He was tall and handsome with a big arm. Joe Namath's the prototype. But Joe Namath has more losses than wins in his career and more interceptions than touchdowns. Joe Namath's number one trait, and I know Joe and like him, was being cool. Drew Brees' number one trait, I don't know, was being accurate. If your route's a little different, if you don't look like everybody thinks you're supposed to, 6 feet, out of Purdue, not a huge arm, people just can't wrap their brains around it. He is the most accurate thrower of the football I've ever seen. Period. In all the years I'm watching football, in his 10 to 12-year prime, he threw the ball more accurately than anybody has ever thrown the football. Wasn't as cool as Joe Namath, didn't have Favre's arm, didn't have the pedigree of Peyton Manning, but good luck to the New Orleans Saints finding his replacement. And 1 year from now, you want to know what the Saints are going to look like? Like New England looks this morning. Crossing your fingers and praying you can get a name quarterback past his prime. Be it Cam Newton, be it Taysom Hill, be it whoever it is. It's remarkable to me that you would waste a radio segment arguing Drew Brees is not a top 10 quarterback of all time. Look at his numbers. Look at the injury. Look what he inherited. Look what he turned around. He dealt with Katrina. He owns the record book. First or second in almost everything that matters. Drew Brees, way to go. All right, Jonathan Vilma, Fox Sports NFL analyst, is now joining us live. 10 years, Super Bowl champ, multiple Pro Bowls, 6 years with the Saints. So when you first go to New Orleans and you played with Drew for 6 years, you hear about Drew, you hear about a lot of guys. And then you're in the locker room with it. What was your first impression, Jonathan, of Drew Brees?
My first impression was, he was kind of a dork, to be quite honest. I was like, he's like, hey, I get there, and he's like, hey, great to meet you, etc. And I remember playing against him when I was with the Jets, and he was with the Chargers. We played a couple times against each other, and I couldn't make heads or tails of if he's trying to be a cool guy, if this is how he is, or what's the deal with him. And after we started having mini camps and And then we go into training camp, and then I realized like he is the real deal, man. He was awesome, the real deal.
Yeah. Was it commitment? Was it verbal? Was it just, I mean, certain guy, Jonathan, there may be 4 guys in a locker room that are leaders. Now, the locker room can have all sorts of talent. What was it about his leadership?
He was, when you talk about the process, diving into the process, fall in love with the process, he's always the first person I think of. He was the shining example of falling in love with the process. A great story I have is when talking about mini camp and training camp, when we would do our walkthroughs, we would have the walkthrough and all 5 receivers would go out on the route. He would throw it to one receiver. Let's say it was Marcus Colston. And then he would literally go and envision himself throwing to the other 4 receivers, and not just like, all right, a slow little throw. It was as if he still had the ball, and that was the first read, and he would move his feet, he'd get his shoulder square, he'd throw the ball, elbow up, everything. And he did this every day for 6 years. I was there for 6 years, and I know he still did it when I wasn't there. And it was, when I say I couldn't believe it. And then you talk about the process of being there, the first one there all the time. And, the way that he approached the game, never got too high on the highs, never too low on the lows. It was always about the process, falling in love with the process. And he was that guy, man, a shining example of it.
Yeah. We were talking about free agency and the 7 biggest contracts in the last few years. None of them have hit. And I always said, I don't love the messaging for free agency that I'm going to bring a guy into my locker room and pay him more than 95% of my locker room. What am I telling my current players? And I wouldn't, if Fox did that and brought somebody in, I would ask the same question. In your career in the NFL, did you ever sense that where it's like, man, you won't pay this guy, but you're paying a guy from another team? Does it sometimes rub guys the wrong way?
It rubs guys the wrong way when you don't know the other intangibles of that player. If you have a great leader in the locker room, and I think this is a part that's always missed or the disconnect between front office and, players and coaches. You can have a guy that he may not be the top player at his position, but what he does for the rookies, how he keeps everyone in check, the intangibles, the value that he has as a leader, that's what the guys start to question, because you're not just taking away a good player. He's obviously good because he's in the NFL. You're removing that leader, and now you're bringing a big money guy, and we question as players, okay, what is he going to bring to the table besides the athleticism, right? You can say, okay, he's making plays, that's great. But if he's a headache, if he's always late, if he doesn't practice hard, if we have to sit here and constantly baby him to get out there and play, it's like you should have just thrown that money back at the guy we had previously. And fortunately, with the Saints, I never had a scenario like that. We drafted well. We did well in free agency, didn't have to let go of, a really solid guy to bring in someone that was a headache. So, that didn't happen. But I can imagine being with guys that you've had a relationship with them and you know what they bring to the table as far as leadership. And then all of a sudden they're gone because of the money. And then now you bring in someone else and it's like, you thought you did better and you really didn't, because all the other things off the field are a headache for us.
It's funny. Russell Wilson in Seattle, there's a lot of rumors. And Joy and our takeaway is, listen, Brady and Belichick never went to dinner once in 20 years. Get over it. Who says you have to love your boss? I mean, I'm sorry, but Pete and Russ are good for each other. I mean, let's be honest, Jonathan, you didn't probably love every defensive coordinator. I mean, there's tension in locker rooms between players and coaches all the time, isn't there?
Of course. And that's what I love about football, because it teaches you, and it's similar to the game of life. You don't have to love everybody in this whole kumbaya. Everyone thinks it's like kumbaya every day in the locker room for teams that are winning. No, man, of course. You have issues. You have problems. Like when we won the Super Bowl, I remember on our run to the Super Bowl, we had multiple fights in the locker room. I'm talking like no joke, multiple fights in the locker room. And you know what? You squabble it out and, things happen and then you move on, right? Because that's what a family does. Like a real family is not always sitting there, everything's on the up and up and it's all good. Real families, they have issues, they have squabbles, they have beefs. They figure it out, they talk through it. Sometimes they fight through it, but at the end of the day, they don't let it affect the main goal. And so when you look at Wilson and Pete Carroll, yeah, okay, they don't like each other. So what? Like you said, who cares? They figure out a way to win. They won a ton of games together. Russell Wilson's one of the best quarterbacks in the game. Pete Carroll, one of the best coaches in the game. They found a way to make it work. And really, the only people making it worse are us, right? The media. We're the ones still talking about it because we're not in that locker room understanding those dynamics.
Hey, what does, circling back to New Orleans, Jameis is very productive passer. Taysom is a very quirky, natural athlete, although to me, he doesn't feel like a 16, 17 game franchise guy. If you had to guess today, who's their starter next year?
Jameis.
That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. No, Taysom, I watched Taysom. So what always happens with new quarterbacks, 4 or 5 games, they have a lot of success, and then you'll see them kind of, I don't want to say falter, but they kind of just don't have as much production. And all you need is as a defensive coordinator, coaches, players on the defensive side, you need time to watch film on them.
Right.
And then now you can start to break them down. And now you gain their tendencies. And now you know, okay, Taysom Hill, 3rd and short, it's a sweep. Sweep left, sweep right. We already know this, right? We already know 1st or 2nd down, if he's going to pass, it's going to be either a deep ball or it's going to be to the outside, right? So when you start to learn these little tendencies of the players, now you can start to really game plan for them. And so that's when I look at the longevity of Taysom Hill. You can game plan for him after about 5 or 6 games, and it's going to be the same stuff. And it's going to be real easy. The problem is really Kamara and Michael Thomas. So when I look at Jameis Winston, I've seen him have success. He threw for 5,000 yards. Yes, he led the NFL in interceptions, but he still threw for 5,000 yards. And that's after everyone had seen film after film, tape after tape of what he can and can't do. So if you look at the quarterbacks that Sean Payton has had in his career, and I know we look at him and Drew Brees a lot, and Drew Brees did throw interceptions at times, I would find it very, very hard to fathom Jameis Winston going out there and throwing as many interceptions as he did with the Bucs. And I'm looking and saying, cut that in half. Let's get him down to, instead of 30 interceptions, 15 interceptions, right, with 5,000 yards. That's a damn good season. Yeah. That's a really good season.
Right. Yeah, that's my takeaway exactly on him. If a guy's productive, I can figure out, I can take away some mistakes, but I can't take a 3,000-yard thrower to a 5,000-yard thrower, but I can take 30 picks to 17 by just implementing a system where there's less risk in the passing game. Jonathan Vilma, great seeing you. Thanks for coming on today, Fox Sports NFL analyst. Best wishes. Thanks again, man.